SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Barcelona, the industry-leading conference bringing you the future of sports betting and iGaming.
SBC Summit Barcelona is the fastest growing sports betting and iGaming event in the industry, happening on the 19th to the 21st of September. Experience the entire global industry coverage under one roof, with 15,000 delegates, over 350 exhibitors, and so much more. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Call of Duty, Fortnite, and CSGO. Three of the biggest video game IPs ever made. Probably throw FIFA in there, but those three, hands down, biggest IPs ever made. And what do these three have in common that makes them kind of such a resounding success? Is it strong stories, glorious graphics, or marvelous mechanics? No. Their success is based around its multiplayer game modes. Don't know if you're aware of this, Counter-Strike had something called Condition Zero, a single player narrative. Did you know of it? Probably not. Has anyone heard of Fortnite Save the World? No. It's a tower defense title that was part of its launch and ultimately kind of failed, and the Fortnite brand was built off Battle Royales. And Call of Duty, prior to its 2007 title, Modern Warfare, it was predominantly a single-player campaign, and in my opinion, it lacked behind others of its ilk. Similar, Medal of Honor, just for example, was a bigger title than Call of Duty in my eyes. Yet, it's their multiplayer offerings that have excelled these games to kind of new record-breaking heights. Now let's look and bring it over to its iGaming counterpart. Over the years, suppliers have been trying to tackle the multiplayer space in an environment that's strongly rooted in social play. However, while some have strongly tried to innovate, others refuse to take the risk, and others refuse to take the risk on a supplier. Until just over 12 months ago, when HungryBear Gaming found a breakthrough with its slot masters. And since I conducted an interview, a Beyond the Reels interview with Justin Chamberlain, the firm's CEO, July last year, HungryBear has inked slot master deals with the likes of Entain, Light & Wonder, Blueprint, and most recently, Ladbrokes. So, has slot masters awoken a new era for multiplayer slot games, and just what can we expect moving forward in iGaming and multiplayer titles? This will be the topic of discussion in today's episode of iGaming Daily, sponsored by SBC Summit Barcelona, where I'm joined by two of the Casino Beats team, Conor and Danny. So, Conor Porter, Danny Lee, how are you doing today? You good?
Hi, James. Yes, we are here on this podcast after that long monologue, but an important monologue to set the scene, really, of the situation surrounding multiplayer slots at the moment and how it's developed over the years and its influences as well from the video gaming space.
Thank you. I didn't think it was I didn't think it was up there with Shakespeare's famous monologues, but I thought it was quite a detailed one, to say the least. Danny, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, James. And don't be so hard on your monologue, mate. I enjoyed it.
People will be learning about it in GCSE English for years to come. Perfect. Like we're gonna get on multiplayer titles, but I just thought it's quite an in-depth, and it can be quite a hard discussion to have sometimes. So we're gonna have a little light question just to set a nicer tone to start the podcast off. And Conor, I know you're a gamer. We've talked about it in the office. Danny, I'm just going to assume you've played games, so bear with us on this one. We're talking multiplayer slot games, but what's your favourite multiplayer game of all time? Either iGaming or video gaming?
It's in terms of video games, bring it back to what you said about FIFA, although it's not as in terms of popularity, it's not in the same heights as your Fortnites or Call of Duties. It's still one of those that you played online with your friends, and that multiplayer aspect was what essentially you were playing the game for. And same with Call of Duty, as you mentioned. I even remember the Medal of Honor games back in the day. saying that now because we are getting on a bit.
It's quite depressing. You've just said back in the day.
Back in the early 2000s. But yeah, multiplayer games like those are definitely game changers, if you pardon the pun, really, when it comes to the video gaming space. And we're starting to see that integrate into the slot space as well, which Danny, our resident slot beats reporter, will know more about. But you're starting to see how video games are influencing how slots are developed in the future.
No, I couldn't agree more. And it's that social aspect of multiplayer, which is at the moment driving the multiplayer aspect in slots. And we'll dive into all this, but don't get us off track because the listeners actually want to know what Danny's favourite multiplayer game of all time is. So, go on, Danny.
Well, I'm actually going to put a bit more of a casino spin on it and say that obviously it's not really seen as sort of a multiplayer game, but obviously it is. Poker, it's one of the most sociable games that we have in the casino industry. Who doesn't love a good poker night with their mates, getting together and nicking a bit of money off them if you're good enough?
Yous are so topic focused right now. I thought you were just going to go pure video game, and I haven't even got a casino option to go for. I'm going to go for PUBG, but Players Unknown Battleground. That was my favorite online game. I'm not even thinking of casino right now. But you know what? You've set the tone, so actually, let's ignore this fun question if you want to dive straight into the topic. Danny, this question kind of came up and it was mentioned in the intro regarding slot masters and their recent deal with Ladbrokes. Just for some context, for the listeners, can you just provide a bit of information about what happened in that deal?
Yeah, so HungryBear have been in the news quite a bit recently in the way that they're sort of developing slot masters to make it a stronger IP, basically. Like you were saying earlier in the intros, those multiplayer games, they carry such a big IP with them, and that can come from their multiplayer elements. Well, with slot masters, its whole IP is that it is like this flagship product from HungryBear that is based around multiplayer play. So you use attack weapons, defense weapons, and you compete in leaderboards, and there's different tournaments and stuff like that. So it's all sort of it's free to play at the moment, but it is bringing players together, having them compete, and just bringing a bit more player engagement to a slot title. So yesterday, we covered it on Slot Beats that HungryBear's partnered with Ladbrokes to launch an exclusive sort of football-themed edition of Slot Masters, which they're going to be calling Clash of the Day. Now, Ladbrokes has been running a few...
Great match of the day, pun.
Yeah, it's not bad, is it? Yes, so Ladbrokes have been running a few free-to-play tournaments, competitions and stuff before with their slot rivals that they've been running. But now they're looking to work exclusively with HungryBear to use their mechanics and take the success that HungryBear's had with Slot Masters and implement it into their own online casino platform. So it's a big move for both, really. I'm sure HungryBear will be excited to be working with Entain, such a big operator, and specifically Ladbrokes, and sort of developing the Slot Masters even further.
Yeah, and again, for clarity, I've tried to find Clash of the Day, just a link to it. I don't think it's out there yet. So Justin, if you're listening to this, send us a link over so we can try it out, because it sounds interesting that you're trying to blend into the sportsbook world while still being online casino.
Just to add to it, the whole Clash of the Day is essentially on the pun of Match of the Day, because it is football themed slot, although it doesn't have any of the Match of the Day imagery or anything like that. But within the slot itself, it's got your traditional symbols of football, basically, like your scarves and your shirts and trophy and a ticket as well. But the special features, essentially the special part of the slot on the multiplayer side is like VAR and tackle and wall and red card, the attack and defense mechanisms that Danny mentioned. They're all linked into that that football theme, and that's where it's probably looking for that engagement with the player and that connectivity as well. So it draws into the players the players fanfare of football and things like that with those imagery, and certainly VAR is a topic of engagement amongst many sports fans right now, and it's being carried over here into this multiplayer slot.
Yeah, as a Manchester United fan, and after the weekend performance with Arsenal, I will not get into VAR because it's still a sore topic. To be honest, you've all hit the nail on the head with kind of multiplayer itself. I've been trying to, well, I was on slot beats for about 3.5 years, and from day one, I was doing a bit of investigating on multiplayer slots because it was something was bubbling under the surface at the time. And there was already whispers that this could be where slot development's going. And there were some interesting breakthroughs, some interesting concepts. And I don't know if either of you two are aware of them, but there was one from Native Gaming. Are you aware of the company?
Rings a bell.
Yeah. So Native Gaming, they partnered with Black Dog Venture Partners for it was how it was explained to me and how it was shown to me in kind of a behind the scenes demo. It was an MMO, a massive multiplayer online slot, but in the style of Pokemon Go. And it was insanely interesting because it was just something visually new. It didn't look like a slot, but you still use the same RNG methods and volatility methods when it came to, say, like battling monsters. Each time you'd spin, you would hit the monster, and the RNG would determine how much XP or health you'd get off the monster, and how much XP you'd gain from the monster would be determined on how much of a percentage you took off the monster. If this makes sense. It was very complex and confusing, but at the same time completely original. But even me explaining this, it kind of shows why we've not heard anything of it, because as we're fully aware, slot players love familiarity. They love the comfort, and this is what Slot Masters has done. It's created something that players are familiar with looking at. It's a simple reel at the end of the day, but it's these little micro multiplayer elements, like the symbols, like the attack symbols, the defense symbols. These are the little simple things which elevate this game to a new level compared to all the other every other attempt in the recent past. And I'd kind of just ask you both this, because I think I've just answered this for myself. Are we seeing the birth of multiplayer slot titles now in the sector?
Well, I think the industry it continues to look for ways to make slots sort of more sociable, and therefore I think that a lot of companies do sort of push and banking on sociability being like the next revolutionary step within the business. So I think if a product comes about and it works and it starts to become adopted sort of in a mainstream way across the industry, then I think that could signal like maybe the birth of multiplayer slots, but someone has to get it right first is the thing. When you look at the slot industry, a lot of concepts sort of get announced and maybe don't quite hit it off, or they do like a soft launch and it's not very successful and they sort of reel it back in a bit. So if often companies can wait for one product to maybe pave the way for others, and in turn can then start to notice the success, know what to do right and what to do wrong. Well, no, know what to do right and not what to do wrong.
Yeah.
And obviously then it can start to snowball into like a huge part of the industry. But I think I'm not quite sure that we could say that the birth is there yet, but it's becoming more likely, I would say, with these sort of deals that we're seeing.
Would you say there's a pathway for maybe a different type of multiplayer slot to emerge? Because we talked about how slot masters have their attacking and defend elements to them. is there a pathway, or I won't say space, because I think we can all agree that there clearly is a space for another variation of a multiplayer slot. But is there a pathway at the moment, or is it still very much a type of slot that's still within its introductory phase when it comes to the larger online casino space? Because I think it's the latter, but I was curious as to what you two may think.
I think there's an argument for both. I can see why you'd say the latter, because it's still in its infancy. Like I said, Slot Masters is the one that has had the success, and there's been countless others which have tried and failed. So they're still getting it right, but due to Slot Masters' success, I think there's been a pathway set where it's the path of comfort. Not to reiterate what I kind of said earlier, it's create this multiplayer title which has social elements, both kind of action-wise, what you make in the game. So the actions you take should be able to dictate what happens to an opponent. That's the fun part about multiplayer. It's the competitive edge to it. And then there's the social element where communication, casino, online casino, and casino in general, their bread and butter has always been that social environment. When you go to a retail casino, yes, you go in to place bets and stuff, but it's that engagement with others in that space, which sets retail aside and is something that's never really been able to be replicated online. It's a social aspect that's kind of growing, which is creating that community. And we've seen it with live spins when they offer kind of the streamer bets, that community where you're betting on what a streamer's doing, and that engagement with streamer and audience is excelling that kind of social element. And kind of reverting back to your question, I know I'm going to a little divert there. Yes, the path has been set, I think, and that path is comfort, so players know what they're actually playing. It has to look like a slot. It has to have those traditional slot elements, and it also has to have that engagement with players. So I think that's the path that people will try and replicate now moving forward, and then look to innovate on, I believe. Danny, I don't know if you've got a view on that one.
Well, yeah, I think it's clear that there is the space for it, and obviously Slot Masters has come through and seems to be gathering a bit of momentum with the deals that they're making, but it's still on a free-to-play level, so it's not actually really being implemented into real money slot gaming, which is obviously what operators would sort of love to be able to take on and implement into their lobbies, and so that they could maybe, get more out of it, get revenue from it. But there's only so much that you can do differently to what Slot Masters is doing. As you were saying, James, you have to have the traditional elements in there. It has to be a slot. We have plenty of other types of games that incorporate multiplayer mechanics into it, or have like the social casino side of things. Like with Crash Games, you get a lot of experience in what other players are doing, and there's so many different formats that give you a bit of that. But with slots, it has to be implemented into a slot. It's going to be hard for companies to sort of figure out other ways that they can sort of change a slot so much to make it like a new format in itself. So I think that's why we're sort of not really witnessing much else out there other than Slot Masters. Not to say that Slot Masters isn't a brilliant product, because it is, but I just don't think anyone else has quite figured out as good a way to implement multiplayer features into a slot as Slot Masters has.
Yeah, and I think this is where the next step is for HungryBear and for Slot Masters, because they've taken that next step. Well, they've taken the first step in producing a multiplayer slot that works free to play. The challenge is making this not free to play. Some of the controversy surrounding multiplayer slots could be down to kind of like operators and the kind of transferring of money between players. Like, operators will need to do more due diligence when it comes to these multiplayer slots. And to be frank, when it comes to money laundering ramifications, I don't think online casinos have the capability or the software to do these due diligence at the moment, because there'd just be too much to kind of comprehend, and there'll be so many elements of the unknown that they couldn't kind of follow. There's something similar that they have in the poker world. It's called like chip dumping, and that's kind of gambling collusion in a way. So if players could transfer funds from one player to another in a multiplayer slot, they would need to find a way to regulate that and make sure player protection and anti-money laundering regulations are kind of in place to follow that. Another thing is, I just don't think, certainly in the UK, so let's look at UK specific, because this is where this deal's happened with HungryBear. I don't remember anything from the recent white paper from the UKGC that have kind of honed in on the multiplayer side of slot games. I know we've had the recent stake limits and so forth, but I just don't think there's actually been that much focus on multiplayer slots. And that's probably because it's still in its infancy. But the fact we're not looking at it now in an updated Gambling Act review kind of shows it's probably not on the horizon on operators' minds to kind of to concern themselves too much with. Don't know if you used to have anything to add to that.
Only in terms of potential problems later. Obviously, responsible play and responsible gambling have to be at the forefront when it comes to these multiplayer titles. But if you're playing with a friend on this multiplayer slot, then it could be difficult if they were to say, "Oh, I want to continue playing, but the other person is doesn't want to." So the pressure may come from that side of the things. Where hopefully that makes sense in a way. But yeah, just making sure that responsible play and responsible gambling is at the forefront of these slots, and not the encouragement or of playing with friends, essentially, because I'm not too sure what yeah.
I get where you're coming from, because, and I'll give an example for myself. When Crash Games kind of hit the scene, I think it was 2001-ish, I kind of encountered my first one. We was invited, I'm not going to name the company, but we was invited to a preview day on their latest Crash game, and we had a competition with fellow journalists to see what it was like. And I kid you not, I was so competitive. I got so addicted to it, and I was eager to win. And that was in a free-to-play preview. If you throw money into the equation, it'll be on another level. So I get where you're coming from when you have that competitive edge with a friend, and you're low on funds, and you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna put another tenner on because I can beat him here." That's kind of where responsible gaming comes into play, and something that slot masters and anyone else trying to replicate a multiplayer kind of slot really needs to take into strong consideration if you are moving away from the free-to-play kind of model. And that'd be an interesting space to watch, because it really needs to be at the forefront of people's minds. And I think this kind of leads on to the next question I have, on where we are short on time. I'm going to ask this one more question. And again, this leads on to what we just talked about. There's been kind of a slow progression in the multiplayer space when you compare it to the video game counterpart. And I was going to ask why you think this is, because I mentioned in the intro, 2007 was when Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out, and that was kind of the first major first-person shooter multiplayer game for the video game sector. We're in 2023, and we're only just seeing a multiplayer slot title. Why has iGaming been slower than video games in that sense, in terms of developing a title, a multiplayer title?
Well, I think, like you were saying before, it comes down to all these different factors. There's so many resources that need to go into actually sort of developing the concept, and then you've got, like I said, regulation needs to catch up with these sort of developments. And I think it's just a case of, like I said earlier, just sort of waiting for someone to come out and make it sort of worth producing a multiplayer slot. Making one work, making one legit, properly licensed, completely regulated, and then bringing it into the real money world, and sort of, like we said, paving that way for other ones to come across. But I think for now, like we're seeing with these sort of free-to-play versions and that infancy of multiplayer slots, I think the next step we need to take is a bit more of a mass adoption of these like free-to-play versions. Because if we can expose more players to multiplayer slots, then the demand for them should only really go up, because obviously they've got so many benefits, that competitive element that you've mentioned as well. There are many reasons why players would prefer to play a multiplayer slot. But like I said, someone needs to make that extra step and try to bring it into the real money world, or develop the free to play product in a way that gives it mass adoption and then can be create that demand for multiplayer games.
Mm-hmm. And I'm round this up now because we are short. What do we see moving forward for multiplayer slots? Where's the success?
To draw back onto the Clash of the Day title, I think it is just in recognizable themes that link with the player that they can easily understand and therefore enjoy overall when playing with their friends. If it's something too complicated, then it's going to be difficult for in terms of engagement for the player, and they're just going to go back to play in a slot that they recognize and understand easier. So something that's easy to understand and grasp, I think, is probably the most important thing when it comes to multiplayer slots.
Yeah. So I think the future of multiplayer slots sort of lies with the developers. If it is something that is worth carrying out and working on, then I think it is something that we will start to see more of. But I think it's a bit ambiguous at the moment whether slot companies actually want to, spend the money, use the resources to be able to work on that, when obviously they've got so many other products that they'll be working on, whether that's slots, live casino, or instant games like Crash and Mine and stuff like that. So I'm happy to see these developments at the moment with games like Slot Masters becoming a bit more exposed to more general audiences. Like Ladbrokes is obviously a very popular operator, especially here in the UK. And like Conor was saying, if it's got that football features, then there are going to be some people that may have never even clicked on a slot before. They're like, oh, that looks quite interesting. I can pick my own football team in there. And it's about gathering the audience. And then I do think that we will slowly start to see it more, but like I said, I do think it will be quite a slow development.
Mm-hmm. I think just from this conversation, my mindset of the future has kind of twisted and turned in this conversation, and I genuinely believe that the future of multiplayer slots will not be in paid slot titles. I think its usefulness will be in the free-to-play market and used as an acquisition tool for players out there and for operators and aggregators to use. I genuinely believe people will be more engaged and enticed with coming onto these titles in a free-to-play zone, and we're seeing such a kind of a bigger emphasis on that market. Certainly Slot Temples recently, it got a UK free-to-play license. We're going to see more of that, and that's kind of where I see multiplayer slots slotting, so to say, in the future moving forward. Because I just feel, I think going off Conor's responsible gambling comment, I think there's too much around there to regulate that space and protect players, while the free-to-play market is a perfect environment moving forward. I say this every time. We could talk about this for hours on end. I really could, to be honest. But we don't have the time. So, Conor, Danny, thank you for joining me today to talk about multiplayer slots. To the listeners out there, if anything that we've discussed in this podcast, I will leave links to articles below from the SBC Media roster of websites. Conor, Danny, thank you for joining us. And to listeners out there, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Barcelona, being held at the Fira Barcelona Montjuic on the 19th to the 21st of September. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network, or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.